Nate, we are back, and you were kind enough to share your top 30 running back rankings. This is going to be fun and somewhat brutal because we were having a discussion pre-show that once you get past the top guys, especially, it's kind of the Wild West when it comes to running backs and how they shake out. Kind of depends on your flavor between, do you want youth, do you want upside, do you want production? And obviously, it kind of comes down to your team builds. We'll get to that some other time. But before we get into it, if you're enjoying the video, please leave a like. Comment down below. We're going to have disagreements. That is a-okay. We want to hear why you're higher or lower on some of these players and have discussions on why that is. And if you want more rankings, including my very own top 100, Nate's other positional rankings, as well as his debut rankings that'll be coming out later this month, head over to patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. Get in that Discord. Get in that Discord for a free 7-day trial. Check out some bonus podcasts while you're there. Upgrade to that top tier to get all the rankings included along with it and access to our rookie draft guide if you haven't had your rookie draft yet, or if you just want to check out that guide for next year to get ahead of the curve next year in your rookie drafts as well, see what we have to offer there. But now with all the promo in the books, Nate, let's get to the content that people came for. What does your first tier look like? Tell me who's there. Tell me why they're there.
I had to put together 30 running backs for this ranking. It was very difficult, I will be honest. After the first couple guys, we talked about this pre-show. One of my strategies when I build a team now, and I've been doing this for a couple years now because I kind of saw this coming, is I need one really good running back, one of these guys like in the top 3 tiers, 4 tiers maybe that I have here. And then outside of that, the word you used is piecemeal. You piece together the rest. You don't necessarily need a strong RB2. Maybe you have 3 RB3s and you just kind of make it work throughout the season, especially with the injury history that we have with this position. But let me get to those running backs that you do want to build your team around. At the top tier here, we have Breece Hall and we have Bijan Robinson. They are the young stud running backs of this league right now. And both of these guys are the main workhorses for their teams. They are the lead in their backfield. And there's another young stud running back that we'll talk about in just a moment, but he does not have the full workload of his backfield. Behind Breece Hall right now, we have Braylon Allen, who disappointed us with his draft capital and maybe was not as hyped up throughout the draft process as we thought he was going to be. I don't think he's much of a threat to Breece Hall at this point. And then we have, Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier is behind him. He has eaten into his workload in the past, but is that more of Arthur Smith or is that more of Tyler Algier and his talents? I think it's a bit more of Arthur Smith over the past couple of years. I think Bijan Robinson this year, we're going to see easily have over 300 touches, especially when you consider the receiving work he's probably going to get. He's set up for a huge, huge season. We know that once they get to 25, 26, we start to see that cliff come for the production. That's usually the time that they're coming off the rookie contract as well. And there hasn't been a ton of luck for players who are going into free agency, running backs in their fantasy production once they've landed on a new team. Honestly, usually what you're hoping for is they re-sign. You get another year or 2 out of them on their original team. You get that same workload. Once they go to another team, we can have everything like what we're hoping to see this year with Saquon, Barkley, or you could have what we saw last year with Miles Sanders. There is such a range of these running backs once they hit free agency that it is worth investing the top draft capital, the top investment of your players into a guy like Breece Hall, into a guy like Bijan Robinson, who we feel confident about for 3-4 years from now, with their workload, with their talent level. And outside of these 2 guys, there is still a lot of talent on the board, but outside of these 2 guys, it starts to have question marks. These guys I really want to build around. They're expensive, but they're worth it.
Breece Hall, what he did last year, putting together an incredible season, despite the Jets' offense being not good. When you're just trying to find out what running backs are going to be good for a season, one of the things you want to do, find out what offenses are going to be good. On top of the whole ACL injury coming back for a top 5 season, that's only been done by a handful of running backs, and it's less than a handful. It's only a couple in the last 2 decades. Breece Hall coming back, having a top 10 season, top 5 season even, I believe. Absolutely incredible. His involvement in the receiving game as well. Bijan, we're expecting a much larger workload for him, a lot less of a split between him and Tyler Algier. These 2 are bell cows. I love the concept of building around both of them as a running back. And even some of these other top guys, I do have a line where I kind of cut it off, but for the most part, I could not be happier building my running back room around these 2 guys for the next 4 years, 3-4 years, providing health situation. The one thing to consider with Breece Hall that you kind of touched on with the whole contract situation, his is going to be coming up a heck of a lot sooner than Bijan Robinson, because he was a day 2 pick. So he only has 4 years to start with. He's already burned up 2 of them. So in 2 years, we're going to be looking at him. Whereas Bijan, he's 4 years out from another contract extension. Most likely, I'm sure they'll probably extend him when the time comes with his 5th-year option. So love this tier here. Love building around these 2 players. I don't think you can do a whole heck of a lot better, especially when you look at the long-term window. Short-term, maybe a different discussion. But even then, I think these guys are top players. So let's go ahead and move on into this next tier where one lone player sits in this next tier here. And I have actually the same setup with my first 2 tiers here as well. This guy is alone, but tell us why he's here alone, but why he's still up at the top here in tier 2.
Yeah, when talking young, talented running backs in this league, it is Breece Hall, is Bijan Robinson, and it's Jahmyr Gibbs. He is firmly in that conversation. What he showed us last year with his explosiveness, his efficiency, his receiving ability, he's probably the best receiver out of the backfield in the NFL right now, outside of like Christian McCaffery. And Christian McCaffery has a lot more years of experience to hone in that craft. But Gibbs is just on another level when it comes to receiving work and that explosiveness out of the backfield. I have him here in his own tier. He's in tier 2. It's just him. He does not have the workload, the volume that Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson have. David Montgomery is a very good running back. He's going to show up on this list because he's a very good running back. He's 26 years old right now. And I think David Montgomery is going to be sticking around another couple of years as well, whether it's on the Lions or a different team. I don't think he's going to be going away anytime soon. So with that, Jahmyr Gibbs is a little limited in his ceiling because of the volume. But we look at his fantasy performances last year. He still has those big weeks. He still has the consistency week in, week out because of the receiving work. And we know that with the running back position, the receiving work is so important for having, a really good box score at the end of the day that helps you with your fantasy points. So Jahmyr Gibbs, because of his youth, because of his ability, he is in a tier here where he's just below those top 2 guys, but he is above everybody else because of his youth, because of his explosiveness, his efficiency, and what we all expect him to do moving forward. He's definitely going to be, a top 12 seasonal running back moving forward, even with the slight limitation in volume. And having him, he's another guy that while he's not quite to the tier of Bijan and Breece, I would love to build a team around Jahmyr Gibbs.
The only limiting factor for him is Dave Montgomery being in the game, which, as we've talked about more and more over time, is that it might not be the worst thing to have a running back backfield that is split up a little bit, especially for somebody like Jahmyr Gibbs, who we expect to be incredibly efficient between athleticism, between just his play style, his quick cutting ability and stuff like that. You'd expect that to be better in small doses than if we try to run him into the ground doing 20 carries a game. He might just be better on 10 to 12 carries a game, getting 5 or 6 targets seems like a lot, but somewhere in that range of targets per game. And it sounds like they're trying to get him even more involved in the passing game this year, which is awesome. You love to hear that. But Jahmyr Gibbs certainly up here with the youth and the overall upside week to week, and that only limiting factor being David Montgomery, which I would expect, I think, to transition more to Gibbs, where he's getting the primary bits of usage, where Dave Montgomery still gets to be in there, but it's, we see a transition of, maybe instead of even 50-50, it's more 60-40 to Gibbs, or even 55-45 would be awesome for Gibbs. So
we know that David Montgomery, he's often used as the inside runner around the goal line. But looking back at last year, the second half of the season, over the final 8 games of the season, including playoffs for Jahmyr Gibbs, he had 8 touchdowns in 8 games. And every single one of those games, except for one, he had at least 1 touchdown. In one of those games, he had 2. So 8 touchdowns in his last 8 games. So obviously there is some goal line work there that is being shared from David Montgomery.
Sure.
So
moving along here, we got some old Bucks with, I would say, some question marks on one because we haven't seen it in a bit. And then we have question marks on one because we know the cliff is coming, but when is the cliff coming? What do we have here in tier 3? I like these players, but like I said, there's some questions. What do you got?
Yep. At the running back position, Bob, I was talking about this with you before the show. It is really hard to rank these players, especially after the first 3. The first 3 are obvious. It's chalk. It's really easy. After that, I don't think that these guys are hard to rank, but this is where we start to get into the question marks of how do we value the running back position in Dynasty Fantasy Football? Because youth is king with running back. We know that. You got the shelf life is short, so you got to use them when you get them. But then you need points. You also need points to win your fantasy championship. It's great to have a team full of rookies and sophomores, but if you're not scoring points, then your team just looks really nice on dynastydaddy.com. It's not actually scoring fantasy points and getting you to the championship. So at the end of the day, the running back position, it is also skewed so heavily for the older players, the veteran players. Maybe you don't have a ton of value on them in Dynasty, but when it comes to setting your lineup, you need these guys to actually win. And if you play fantasy football, you probably want to win your league. That is one of the main reasons you're playing fantasy football. So these running backs, they're really hard to kind of nail down where our values are. And here in our tier 3, we have 2 guys that are so valuable because of their ability to score points. And number 1, I got Jonathan Taylor here. This is not in any particular order. They're just in a tier. We got Jonathan Taylor, who we haven't seen it quite as recently, but we have seen the flashes over the couple weeks over the season. We haven't seen a huge season finish from Jonathan Taylor in a couple of years, but we have seen the weeks when he's been healthy, his ability to score 30 plus points in a week, have those big games where he has 2 touchdowns, he runs for 150 yards. He's also been used in the receiving game. He does have Trey Sermon behind him. That is his competition out of the backfield right now. So going into this year, Zach Moss, showed up a little bit last year, but I don't think Trey Sermon's going to be quite as competitive as Zach Moss was last year. So I think we're looking at a season here coming up. Jonathan Taylor is going to get a ton of volume out of the backfield. We will see how Anthony Richardson plays into that equation and how many touches he takes, especially around the goal line. But I expect really big things out of Jonathan Taylor, who also was signed to a long-term deal. So he's there, a couple more years as well. And then speaking of extensions, we have Christian McCaffrey here in this tier as well. And you could definitely argue that Christian McCaffrey still is the RB1 in Dynasty, just because until he stops scoring 25 points a game, how can he not be? It's like Travis Kelce has been the tight end 1 for Dynasty for so long, even though he's been in his 30s for a couple years now. So with Christian McCaffrey, he just got signed to another 2-year extension. He's there 3 years, we're expecting. Until he stops scoring 25 points a game, you can't drop him any lower. And I know at this point, I believe 26, 27 now, he's getting near that cliff.
He's 28.
He's 28, Bob. He's 28. But he doesn't look like it on the field. And we know while this modern era, the shelf life is shorter, the greats, they still might have it in them where they're playing the same as the greats from the 2000s, where they can play into the early 30s. Derrick Henry, another guy who's 29 right now, but just had one of his best seasons last year where, his miles per hour that he was clocked at, the same as it was like in 2018, 2019. He's still playing at a great level. Christian McCaffrey is doing the same. He is one of the main offensive weapons over there in the 49ers. He was on an MVP campaign last year, actually, throughout most of the season. So let's not forget how good Christian McCaffrey is, just because we have some new young talent in the league. Christian McCaffrey solidly here in tier 3, someone that I'm very excited about still, despite his age. You want a piece of Christian McCaffrey if you're a contending team.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cheat code. I mean, as fun as these other running backs that we've talked about, like you said, he has every argument to be the Dynasty running back 1 still, until he isn't, basically, because these numbers are just, mind-bogglingly incredible. So I love him here. Jonathan Taylor, you mentioned, we haven't seen it in a while. And oddly enough, there was 2 years where Christian McCaffrey was lost to injury for the most part, barely played for 2 years. There were the similar questions coming up. Do I think Jonathan Taylor is guaranteed or locked in for some kind of similar bounce back? I wouldn't go that far, but we know the talent is there. Can the health be there? Can the situation be there? I think he's in the right situation. Can he be healthy? That's the big question mark we have for Jonathan Taylor, and his contract's figured out, which was a question coming into last year. And the disrespect you chose to put on Evan Hull there is a little unsettling to me.
Hey, it's not my disrespect. I've been reading the camp reports because for some reason I'm interested in who Jonathan Taylor's backup's going to be, and they've made it pretty clear that Trey Sermon is the RB2 there. So,
well, give it time. But overall, I like this tier. It makes 100% sense. This next tier is interesting. I like 2 of the 3 players here that we're about to talk about in this spot. This is probably the first big disagreement, but it's not end of the world or anything. We're still going to be friends after it. But
all right.
I like this tier in general. And I think this is where I have my cutoff of what we talked about at the top of the show, having that one running back to build around. I think this is where the list ends for me. And that's why one player doesn't jive in this list for me. But without any further stalling hesitation, let's talk about this tier. What do you got in tier 4, Nate?
Yeah, Bob, this is where I start to not like the running back position. While there's still good players here, this is where all the questions start coming up with what's the longevity of these players? Are they going to have the same role as we've seen before? This is where it starts to get in like you said, these are the last couple players I really want to build around. But ideally, unfortunately, there's only 5 running backs that I feel great about building around right now, and 2 of them are over 25 years old. So here in tier 4, we have Saquon Barkley, just signed a large deal with the Eagles. Jason Kelce has moved on. I don't know if that offensive line is going to be as good, but I also expect it to be less of a tush push with Jason Kelce gone, which maybe gives the running back with the Eagles some more touchdowns. Barkley would deserve them. And I think Barkley, while this game for the Eagles offense will still run a lot through the air, and they just paid A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, Barkley is going to be a big part of this offense. They're going to rely on him more than I think they did Swift last year. He's that kind of explosive player, that kind of game changer. They haven't had there for a while. So I expect big things out of Barkley this year. He's getting a little bit older. While I think he has the same potential for 2025 as guys like Jonathan Taylor and CMC, I think he has that ceiling in him. I don't feel as confident about it. And he is, someone that we haven't seen produce at the same level as CMC recently. So he just drops him into tier 4 here for me. But I'm still very excited about Barkley. And I think, if you're a contending team, he is one of the better running backs you can have right now on your team. Next up is Travis Etienne. And I'll be honest, Bob, I don't love Travis Etienne in this tier. I don't know if this is the player that you have some issues with. It's not. But Travis Etienne, he's been getting a ton of volume. I don't think his efficiency was super great last year for the Jaguars, but overall the efficiency for the Jaguars offense was not great. That was a team that, kind of lost its identity last year, especially when Christian Kirk was injured. They've kind of reformed that offense this year. There's talk about my man Tank Bigsby maybe spelling Travis Etienne a bit more. That might be good for Travis Etienne, who his efficiency could go up. He was getting hit a lot last year, and he's not the biggest guy in the world. But that volume last year that he received, even if he receives just 80% of it this year, he's still going to probably perform as a top 12 running back. So that keeps him in this tier for me because I believe he still has 2 years on his rookie contract. With the volume that he's received, the production he's put up, I'm kind of begrudgingly putting him here. I would feel a lot better about him in the next tier, and he might end up there by the end of the season if we do see his efficiency not go up or his volume go down, those two things together. But as we saw last year, he kind of has to fit in this tier for me. And then, Bob, I guess this is the player that you're disagreeing with.
Mm-hmm.
And I get it, but I think that there's big things in store for James Cook. We've talked about how this offense is changing. They moved on from Stephon Diggs. They brought in some wide receivers, but they didn't bring in any wide receiver who's going to go in there and fill Stephon Diggs' shoes. This is like when Tyreek Hill left the Chiefs. None of those players that came into the Chiefs afterwards were there to replace Tyreek Hill. It was going to be a group effort to replace Tyreek Hill. It is a group effort with the Bills to replace Stephon Diggs. I think Dalton Kincaid is going to be a huge part of that offense. And what we saw over the second half of the season last year, which correlated with Stephon Diggs's, lack of production in fantasy football, was the Bills ran the ball a lot more. The Bills became a running team the second half of the season. And with that, James Cook started to score a lot more points. He finished as a top 12 running back. James Cook is someone who I think now is set up for a really, really good season with the Buffalo Bills as their offense looks to be more run heavy and to utilize him more out of the backfield. They did draft Ray Davis, who I expect to also play a part in that backfield. But I think James Cook, his efficiency and his volume continuing to go up. I believe he saw well over 200 rushes last year, and I think that's going to continue. I think we could see over 250 this year for James Cook. I don't think he's going to be a 300 touches on the ground kind of guy, but I think we're going to see around 250 this year as this team is a bit more run heavy. And with that kind of volume on that offense, with his pass catching ability, I think he's going to have to deserve to be in this tier because the production at the end of the day, Bob, if the Bills are the running team that they showed at the second half of last year, this will come to fruition. If they go back to that offense that throws the ball a ton, is throwing it around the field, which I don't think is how they're set up now with their personnel, then this would obviously be a little inflated. But if they're going to be that running team, I think James Cook is going to prove me right.
Yeah, with projection in mind, I don't hate this spot. I just think because a large part of what plays into my tiers is not only is how players are valued. And I just think there's a clear difference between how James Cook is valued versus Travis Etienne and Saquon Barkley. But with the projection in mind, like if he does hit those numbers and is efficient, productive, getting touchdowns, etc., I think Ray Davis actually, and this is somebody I kind of pooped on, but in the pre-draft process. But I love his landing spot, got a good enough draft capital, and the situation of the team. I do think that they are going to shift to a bit of a more run-focused approach. Not saying they're going to run more than they pass or anything, but I think that is something they are going to try to do. Put less weight on Josh Allen, let Josh Allen go win games, but not put all of the weight on Josh Allen to go win games. I think Ray Davis cuts into a lot more of the on-the-ground work, and I think just with James Cook's size, I think it'd be foolish to run him so much. 250 feels rich to me for amount of carries, but it's totally possible. I'm not going to rule it out, but I certainly won't rule it in. But that's the biggest gripe for me, is that the valuations of the players now are just too far off to put them in the same grouping. But with projection in mind, I don't hate it, because I could see a world where James Cook is that productive. But I see a world too where, going back and, we have to adjust to what's happened in the NFL. We were all not super high on James Cook coming to the NFL. We kind of had him pegged as that receiving back option, not as much of a pure runner, but, things have changed. He's obviously been used and taken over that backfield over time. How long does that continue? Obviously up for a question, but that's my biggest gripe, is just the valuations of what else is in this tier versus hating the player or anything like that.
Yeah, I understand that. I try to make my tiers, I have to take in valuation of the market, but,
Sure.
I want to make my rankings where, James Cook is not valued here, but I don't know if he should be valued here, but I think if you can get him right now, I think he's a value. I think his value in what I expect from him and his value in the market is different, where I would call him a buy. This is where you see the difference in the rankings versus the market value. Like, hey, that's a guy that Nate believes in. Maybe you could take advantage of that opportunity. And to look at his production last year in the regular season, 237 carries last year. I don't think 250 is at all a stretch. Over the final 7 games of the season last year, in 5 of those, he had at least 15 carries or more. Over the first 10 games of the season last year, he only had 2 games with 15 carries or more. And nothing over the first 10 games of the season. His high for a game was 17 carries. He reached that mark 3 times over the final 7 games, including a game with 25 carries, a game with 20 carries. So obviously an increase in volume there, an increase in production. 1,100 yards last year, only 2 touchdowns on the ground, Bob. If we can see some improvement there, his fantasy production will skyrocket.
That'll certainly help. And I think, in playing into your point of, seeing the ranking above market value, if you are going to buy this player, keep in mind, don't buy at this price. Don't pay Travis Etienne, Saquon, Barkley prices to go get James Cook. James Cook is probably valued at the top end range of a running back 2 in most cases. Buy at that price. That gives you some wiggle room on the ceiling that James Cook has to play with. We like to buy players that have ascending trajectories. If that is the case with James Cook, like I said, I see the possibility, but I also like some of the running backs behind him too, to hopefully ascend and hold down things. And, a lot of times, we get caught up in what could be and not what might actually will be. And I'm not saying that's what you're doing here or anything like that. I think your argument is sound for why he could end up here, but that's, like I said, my biggest argument or gripe so far. I don't think I have a ton the rest of the way. They might come up. Who knows? It could happen.
I never thought I would be the James Cook guy, but here I am.
Yeah, it's an odd world. I remember years ago, just for, I was the Tua hater, and now I'm probably one of the most pro Tua players out there, and
shows maturity here on this channel.
Yeah, hey, you gotta adapt, man. You gotta read the tea leaves and adapt to new information. But either which way, we'll truck right along into this next tier. History be damned. We'll move on into tier 5 and talk about a very interesting grouping, in all honesty. Like a player I love, another player I like, another player I'm honestly kind of trying to move off of, just for the reason. I'll let you decide who those might be. Yeah, let's talk about this tier here. I was surprised with the first player we're going to talk about. He was this high in your ranks, but hey, man, I am here for the ride. Zach's going to love this too. What do you got here at the top of tier 5?
Look, I have my personal opinions, but when it comes to ranking, I'm trying to do my best to be as unbiased and objective as possible and to look at the facts, look at the scoring from last year, look at what we set up for this year. And while I do have some question marks about this guy and some red flags, I'm a little doubtful. Starting off this tier 5 is Kyren Williams. Running back for the Rams. Blake Corum has entered the picture. I'm a decent fan of Blake Corum. I don't think he's here to necessarily steal Kyren Williams' job, but I do worry about the overall volume that that he enjoyed so much last year and was a big part of. I mean, he was very efficient, but his volume and goal line touches, the volume of that is what really helped him become the running back that kind of took over the league last year and was a league winner. And if that volume is affected, I don't think his efficiency can really go too much higher up. So that's where some of my question marks come in with him. Until Blake Corum proves that he is a significant factor in that backfield, while I don't love the long-term shelf life of Kyren Williams being a late round pick, being a running back that, they churn through him anyway, this year, until Blake Corum can do it, I think he deserves to be sitting here because after Barkley, Etienne, and Cook, we get a lot of guys that have a lot of question marks and are sharing backfields anyway. It's a little bit of, hey, I do have to admit, Kyren Williams had a really good year last year and he was efficient, and, he's going into a somewhat similar position this year, does have some competition at it through day 2 draft capital. The rest of this running back list is not full of stud options that are, the workhorse in their backfield either. So Kyren Williams sitting here at the top of tier 5.
Real quick before we get into the next one, I have been a huge fan of Kyren Williams since this film came out. He was a very highly graded running back in that class. I think he was the second running back I had graded. And then, the terrible combine, the terrible draft capital, but good things come to those that wait. And I waited for Kyren Williams to break out, and he sure did last year. And I think the best move to make, and we've had this discussion over the offseason, if you have Kyren already, the best move to make to insulate yourself is just go buy Blake Corum, because he's not that expensive to buy. And the biggest red flag for me with Kyren Williams so far has been the injuries. He's had some sort of injury every single season, every single offseason. That's why he barely played his rookie year, was because he was injured through most of it.
Even has an injury already.
He had an injury already. He's fine now, though. He's good to go. He's back on the field. He's been practicing the last couple of days, so he's good. That injury has come and gone, so we can chill about it until the next one pops up. But the 100% the right thing to do is go buy Blake Corum, insulate yourself that way. Don't sell Kyren because you're selling a little lower value-wise anyway right now. The better move is to, instead of selling Kyren low, buy Blake Corum on the lower cost. That's my preferred method, because either way, then you're locked in to that backfield. Because I love Blake Corum as a prospect. I think it was the highest grade on him out of us 3. So I was super bummed to see him go here day 2, no less. But either which way, I'm still a big fan of Kyren, and hearing you sing his praises has made my morning, Nate, to be honest. But why don't you go ahead and talk about this next running back that you're going to sing the praises of? I like this player as well. What do you got?
Yeah, real quick, just saying, I have Kyren Williams ranked, top 10, top 12 running back here. I was only upset when he was being ranked as a top 5 running back. That's when I was upset.
Fair enough. All right.
I said similar things about Miles Sanders a couple years ago when he was a first-round startup pick.
You watch your mouth. You watch your mouth.
Just saying.
Nathaniel.
Let's be careful when we're investing a lot into these running backs. That's what.
Oh, for sure.
If the past couple years have not taught us anything, it's be careful when you invest heavily into the running back position.
100%. I can agree with that very much. But you don't have to invest too much into this running back.
No, but I'm more than happy to. And that is Jonathan Brooks of the Carolina Panthers. Look, Bob, you know this. I am buying into the Carolina Panthers offense this year. I'm very excited about the improvement that I'm expecting from them. Dave Canales there is the head coach, and he has shown improvement for Baker Mayfield and Geno Smith as his last 2 stops. I think we're going to see it this year with Bryce Young. I mean, really can only go up from where he was last year. Watching some film on the Panthers offense, and it is just, their offense was so bad last year. You watch a play, no one's open. No one was ever open. There was not a lot of creative play design. There was not much Bryce Young could do. I think there was definitely some things that Bryce Young could improve upon, but he was getting absolutely no help from his offense. They've invested now. They brought in Xavier Legette, Deontay Johnson, Jatavion Sanders, and Jonathan Brooks, who is coming off the ACL injury back in November. But it was just the ACL. Some people have asked what's the difference between him and Keaton Mitchell, who tore his ACL in December. Keaton Mitchell destroyed his knee, unfortunately. There's a lot of pieces in there that are now missing or broken and had to be fixed. Jonathan Brooks was just the one ACL. He should be ready by training camp. He's already out there moving around. I'm not worried about his ramp up too much. I think we might take a couple weeks to really see him find his footing in the NFL, but that part of that's going to be just becoming, being a rookie. I don't think that injury is going to play too much of a factor. This is not like a Jameson Williams situation where we're not going to see him on the field until week 10. We're going to see Jonathan Brooks early, and I think we're going to see him rather often as well. I really like what he brings to the table and why I have him ranked here. He was RB1 easily in this draft class. He is one of the few running backs in this draft class that can operate as a workhorse, give you the all 3 down ability. And the Panthers need that. Chuba Hubbard, Miles Sanders, while they have, Miles Sanders was not very good last year. Chuba wasn't as well. He wasn't really that efficient, but he handled his workload rather decently considering the offense. But Jonathan Brooks, he's that X factor for that team out of the backfield. He's someone that can create his own yards. He's got the explosiveness we're expecting after this ACL injury. I just love what he did on film this year. I thought he was a great successor to Bijan Robinson, to be quite honest. There was obviously going to be a step down from Bijan, but Jonathan Brooks made that step down as minimal as possible for that Texas team. And I think a lot of teams took notice of that. What we've heard from draft scouts throughout the offseason was if he was not injured, there was a possibility he would have been a first-round pick in the back half of the first round. So I really like Jonathan Brooks' talent. I'm not too worried about the ACL, so here he goes, fitting into the spot.
Yeah, I like this a good bit. Don't have a ton to add. I think you touched on beautifully that they've done a lot to build on this offense. One of the big things with the offense last year, too, not that anybody could get open. Maybe this played a role. One of the blandest offenses in the NFL last year, one of the least play-action ran teams, one of the least RPO teams. And when they did do that, Bryce Young did really well. We had the question in the comments the other day, Bob, how can you advocate for Bryce Young when he was atrocious last year? And it's like, well, you have to look at the situation. You can't put it all on the quarterback. While, yes, making the plays and everything, still heavily involved and whatnot. But you can't look at that offense, that offensive line that was not healthy or very good throughout the season. And it doesn't help when they're not very good, when they're not doing these, play action or RPOs. That gives the offensive line help to – it makes that defensive line a little bit have to pause, and defensive backs have to pause. And it's all about, kind of putting the defense on their heels as opposed to letting them just pin their ears back and blitz every play or whatever they want to do. It's just, it's a totally different dynamic. I am too very excited to see what this Carolina Panthers offense can be. And I know it's been a minute since we've said anything close to that, but definitely interested to see where this goes. I think they've done a good job putting pieces around Bryce Young. And I think Bryce Young is good enough to make good on the pieces he has now, and wide receivers that can get open. That was the big thing last year. Throughout the first half of the season, it was okay, but then it just no wide receiver separation for anybody really. So when he doesn't have anybody that can get open, what's the guy going to do? He's going to try to force things that aren't there, going to try to make plays happen that aren't there, and ultimately look atrocious.
And honestly, Bryce Young, not to make this a Bryce Young episode, but we're going to real quick.
We can do that.
He actually did a great job of not forcing the ball. He didn't throw a ton of interceptions. He didn't make a ton of turnover-worthy plays. I think he might have led the league in throwaways because he was smart and noticed no one was open and just threw it away. The situation matters so much, especially for rookie quarterbacks. Let's keep our expectations relevant. I want to just draw a line here. Bryce Young, okay. Bryce Young's rookie season, just under 60% completion rate, so 59.8, 11 passing touchdowns, was the quarterback 29 in points per game. Let's go back to another rookie quarterback who had a terrible situation he came into. Trevor Lawrence. True. Urban Meyer was there. And Trevor Lawrence, in that rookie season, just under 60% completion rate, 59.6, only threw 12 passing touchdowns, and was the quarterback 29 in points per game.
Whoa, and they were the first overall pick.
And the first overall pick, yeah, how about that? And then in 2022, Trevor Lawrence had a 5.2 points per game increase and was the quarterback 12.
Yeah, not too bad. Not too shabby. I think better things are coming for Bryce Young. But before we get into any quarterback rankings, which might be episodes coming up, who knows? We've been kicking around that idea. So let's talk about the last running back in this tier here. Ton of upside, but there are questions, to say the least. What do you got here?
Our questions. I don't really know what to do with this player, to be honest, Bob. But with the upside that he shows, I have to kind of put him here. I mean, how many players have averaged 7.9 yards per rush over a season with over 100 rushes? None have even hit the 7 mark. I don't even know if anyone's even hit the 6 mark. This is ridiculous. The efficiency that Achane showed last year on the Miami Dolphins was otherworldly. We haven't seen a player have that kind of efficiency, those kind of big plays, their rookie year in such a small sample size, but at the same time, enough of a sample size to know it was more than just a flash in the pan. And he's got the draft capital too. He was a day 2 pick last year for the Dolphins. But at the same time, we got Raheem Mostert there, who had a great year last year and is set up for another good year this year. They just drafted Jalen Wright, day 3 pick, but everyone will tell you that they They sent a third next year to move up and get him. So it's basically day 2 draft capital, right? So there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of good. There's a lot of bad. He caught 20 passes last year, so he was used well in the receiving game. But Jalen Wright, a very explosive player in his own right, and a little bit bigger than Achane. And you also got Mostert there, who, while he is in his 30s, has been very productive over the past 2 years and does not look like he's slowing down anytime super soon. There's a limit in volume, but does it matter with Achane when he's so efficient? Probably not. But he's not someone I'm also feeling confident about building around because of the probably lack of consistency week to week.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, he gave us a couple 30-plus point games last year, but that's intermixed. Against Dallas in week 16, he had 7 carries for 24 yards. There's this week-to-week inconsistency with Achane. While he gives you the weeks where he can win you the week, and there's only so many players in the NFL that can give you 30-plus point weeks. I mean, there's a lot of players that can give you consistently 15, 20 points, maybe some 25-point games in there. But reaching over 30 points in a game is pretty difficult. And, he did that for us multiple times last year, I think 3 times last season. So just that week-to-week upside, if he's your RB2 and you have a consistent RB1 in your lineup, you're feeling really good about the upside that he's bringing you on a week-to-week basis. So while it's harder for me to invest in him, especially, compared to Jonathan Brooks and Kyren Williams, who I think are a bit more consistent, that upside, it makes it hard for me to drop him down a tier, to be honest, because I need to see what kind of consistency we'll get out of him his sophomore year. I mean, it's his rookie year. There's going to be inconsistencies. If he can up his consistency, then he is firmly in this tier, possibly jumping up another tier if he becomes, someone who is consistently getting touches, not just production. If that inconsistency that I'm worried about shows itself this year and Jalen Wright gets a little bit of a role, he's going to be moving down the list a little bit. He's kind of in that middle limbo right now, and this is where I had to put him.
Yeah, I don't fault the spot at all. I think this is about right. I could easily see you swapping him with James Cook, and I wouldn't really bat that much of an eye because I think a lot of people do still value Devon Achane very highly, despite kind of so many things going quote unquote wrong for him this offseason, nothing due to his own fault, but they re-sign Mostert, extend Mostert, then they draft Jalen Wright. So a backfield that maybe you were coming into the offseason thinking, oh man, Achane's going to be the number 1 next year, now has 2 more running backs to compete with. And I don't think Jalen Wright factors in too much year 1. I feel like he's more the succession plan to Mostert. Or that's at least like the plan now. Things could change. He could look really good in camp and, really impress people. Who knows? I wouldn't rule it out. I'm not going to rule it in. But Achane, the definition of a glass cannon, a guy who missed time last year due to injuries because he is smaller, a little undersized, and can give you these incredible upside weeks. But he's somebody I don't want. Like if I have him, I'm okay holding him, depending on what running back he slots in for me as, because I think I'd love to have him as my flex 1, worst case scenario running back 2, because of that upside that you presented, that you talked about. But no chance am I, getting him as my running back 1 and feeling good about it, because until we see that some consistency with volume, consistency staying healthy, I'm going to have a boatload of questions that I just cannot answer until that, and justify having him any higher. But I mean, the ceiling is the moon for this guy and this offense, especially this Miami Dolphins system. This was the landing spot we all wanted for Achane. We were like, anywhere else, big red flags or big question marks. But coming here, I mean, this was a match made in heaven, and it's been good when he's been healthy for the most part. But, that's when you have to ask that question, and when you have to, get into discussions with consistency and things like that, it's a little tough to have him as anything more than want to have him as anything more than my running back 2 or 3. That closes out tier 5. To tier 6 here, Nate, which is another very interesting tier. We got a lot of interesting groupings today. Why don't you talk about what we got here in this tier 6?
So here at tier 6, we start off with Kenneth Walker, very talented running back. And I think talent-wise, he probably could go up a tier. But due to the situation where number 1, Zach Charbonnet is there, and number 2, we have a offense that I think is going to be pretty pass-heavy. They got JSN, DK Metcalf, and Tyler Lockett there. We have the Washington offensive system coming in there. So we're going to see a lot of, passes to DK, passes to JSN. We're going to see a very pass-heavy offense here. I just don't think fantasy-wise the ceiling is there for Kenneth Walker, unfortunately, because the talent is definitely there. So here he is in tier 6. It's worse places to be. This is actually pretty well ranked, I think, but it's just what we've come to now with the running back position.
If you want a really good running back too, I think Kenneth Walker can be your guy, but I think you hit the nail on the head. Not a ton of upside, in this offense that I think ultimately, I think this offense could be better for Kenneth Walker than it has been. Just deciding on what the splits could be with new offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb. Who knows? But I think for the most part, we can probably pencil Kenneth Walker in for solid running back 2 numbers. I think this spot is good because of the youth. You get some production, you get youth as well. I think he's an awesome running back 2 to have.
Yep. And next up, Bob, a player I'm really excited about, and I think is a great value right now, DeAndre Swift, running back for the Bears. This is an offense that is ascending. Swift got a good deal in free agency to join the Bears. They gave him a good amount of guaranteed money. There is not a lot of competition behind him. I know Khalil Herbert's there, Rashawn Johnson, but outside of being very fantasy focused, those running backs are not, going to vie for the job in that backfield. This is DeAndre Swift's backfield. And I'm excited about his pass catching ability, his explosiveness on the ground, especially with a team that now has 3 wide receivers. So I don't expect Swift to face a lot of heavy boxes. I think this offense is set up well for him. I don't know if he's going to have, a top 5, even top 10 season, just because it's an offense that's led by a rookie quarterback. There's going to be some struggles throughout the season. But I think this team, while they're getting Caleb Williams more up to speed, could rely on a DeAndre Swift, who at this point is a veteran running back and someone that is, probably more talented than his numbers have shown over the past years, even though he's been a pretty consistent RB2 in points per game over the past couple of years. I think this year we could see DeAndre Swift's best year yet.
He's definitely in a position to do so. They've invested in him. And like you said, they, in this evolving offense, they could rely on him that much more. Building up quarterback. I don't love buying him, but if you have him, I think another guy you can pencil in as, probably high-end running back 2 production, maybe low-end 1, depending on how that offense picks up over the course of the year. Don't hate the spot here. I have him a little lower, but it's more based on interest and willingness to buy, for the long-term picture than think he's bad or anything like that. I think he's a fine enough player, but the excitement just isn't there for me with DeAndre Swift.
The excitement for me with DeAndre Swift is they signed him to a deal that is certainly a 2-year deal.
Sure.
We talk about like Josh Jacobs with a 4-year deal that's either a 1 or 2. Like DeAndre Swift is with the Bears for 2 years, and I'm excited about this offense over the next 2 years. And with most of these running backs, especially at this point, it is hard to project any of them out for more than 2 years. So knowing that I have Swift in a fun offense for 2 years gets him pretty high up in my ranks.
And to clarify, when you say locked into 2 years, we know it's a 3-year contract, but there are pretty significant easy outs after year 2. That's what we're talking about. We know he's cemented into this offense for 2 years via contract, but yes, it's a 3-year deal, but with running backs, you can usually chop off the last year or 2, but he's locked in, like you said. So go ahead, dive on into the next one you got here.
Yeah, next up, we got Rachaad White, who's coming off an incredible season. The volume that he received with Tampa Bay last year was one of the best in the league, and we saw that with his fantasy production, being a top 5 running back last year. A ton of receptions. He's check down king over there in Tampa Bay. Also a good amount of work on the ground. They did bring Bucky Irving in, who, Bob, you're a big fan of. I'm a pretty big fan of myself. Ended up being a day 3 pick. I don't think Bucky's really going to eat into a ton of Rachaad White's work, but he's going to take some. They've talked about how they need to spell Rachaad White from last year. He had way too many touches. Kind of a similar thing to what the Rams have said about Kyren Williams. Like, hey, we need to give this guy a break. Same thing with Rachaad White here. I think he's very talented. I think his finish last year was pretty heavily dependent upon the insane amount of volume that he received.
Mm-hmm.
And with that volume going down, I don't expect him to have the same type of finish. I think he could finish as a low-end RB1 because of his receiving upside, but I think that's more of a ceiling now versus the top 5 season we saw last year. So with that, and only having 2 years left on his rookie deal, I do have Rachaad White here in this tier.
And he's a little older for a prospect as well. Already 25, I believe. 2 years left on the rookie deal, like you said. I mean, my biggest concern actually boils down to, while he might have a little less volume, I think Bucky was brought in to spell some of that. And they've said that they wanted the exact same player, and I think they got a pretty darn close player in Bucky Irving. And the one knock on Rachaad White has been his lack of efficiency. You touched on his volume being king and why he did so well last year. 100% factual. His efficiency was pretty bad, in all honesty. Maybe Bucky gets some more work, gets some more run, full pun intended. I don't know, but my biggest concern is actually that Dave Canales leaving the offensive coordinator position, opening it up to a new regime. That's a concern for me. But overall, I think this spot is good. I think if you have him, like you said, low end running back 1, high end running back 2 is probably still fair to say, even with some changes coming, because he's still probably the primary ball carrier, provided he doesn't get injured, provided he doesn't absolutely suck and Bucky doesn't do really well, which, hey, I'm not going to rule out Bucky because I was a huge fan of him. I was hoping he'd land in a little bit more favorable of a situation where he'd get a little more opportunity, but he isn't getting an opportunity over Rachaad White anytime soon.
So next up, Bob, we have David Montgomery to round out this tier. Like I said earlier, I think that he is a really, really good NFL running back. And I think because of fantasy football and his time in the Bears, he's still a little undervalued. Last year, he had 13 touchdowns, over 1,000 yards on the ground, 219 carries. I expect similar usage from him this year. I know Gibbs was ascending last year, and it's easy to say, oh, well, Gibbs is just going to continue to take over the backfield. I think the Lions love what they have with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. And Montgomery coming off, what was basically a career year, second most rushing yards he's ever had in a career, best yards per attempt this year with 4.6, 13 touchdowns, like I said, was also career high, second highest grade as a PFF running back. This guy's not going anywhere. And whether it's on the Lions this year or on a different team next year, I think David Montgomery is still going to give us another 2 or 3 years of production. I think he's that good of a running back where he's going to stick around and continue to produce on a team, even if it's not RB1 numbers. I think over the next couple of years, he's going to continue to give us top 24 numbers because of his ability to make the plays that he needs to make and also his efficiency down near the goal line. This is a guy that is all the physical traits we're looking for, has become a really good runner as well. His vision has continued to improve throughout his career. And we saw that last year with a career year. So he's firmly in this tier for me. I think he's one of the better RB2 values you can add right now. A lot of people, they see the ascension of Jahmyr Gibbs and they want to move on from David Montgomery, get out a year early than a year too late. Sure, you can argue that, but I think next year might be the year early versus a year late. I don't think it's this year just yet. So I'm still on David Montgomery. I think he's going to be a really solid producer, not someone I want to lead my team at the running back position. Like we've talked about, the value, you don't need to invest heavily in RB2. I think David Montgomery as your RB2, you'd be really happy with.
Yeah, I think this is one of the piecemeal options that we kind of talked about at the top of the show, where piecemealing this offense together or your running back room together, he's not somebody I really even want as a running back 2. It comes down to how am I slotting him into my offense, in my fantasy offense, or my lineup, I should just say, and how much does it cost to acquire if I have to acquire him. If I just have him and he's, a flex option for me, and that's kind of where I have him rotating in between other wide receivers ideally, I'm probably fine with that. I'm probably fine with him being my running back 3 or 4 on a team. But value-wise, that could come into a play where you're getting him at a cheap cost, like you said, because with the ascension of Gibbs or the presumed ascension of Gibbs taking over more of the offense, where Montgomery, like we've alluded to, is not going away. It is just going to be annoyingly frustrating for managers that don't have him. Managers that have him, though, will love him, especially if you have the tandem of both. I like having both in case one or the other gets injured. And honestly, there are probably going to be most weeks where you can start both. Like you could start both for a lot of the season last year and be pretty happy with it, especially after about the midway point. You could start both and be relatively happy with your outcome. That wraps up tier 6, though. We're getting into a small baby tier 7 here, the second smallest tier we have of the day. 1 year rental, 1 to 2 year rental type of options here. If you're competing, I think you're in a good spot, but long term, we have a lot of questions. What do you got?
Yeah, this is kind of the break. All these players so far, I would be happy with as, at least RB2 on my team. If David Montgomery's my RB2 on my team, I'm feeling good about my running back position. At this point, going into tier 7, these are the last 2 players that I want as my RB2 on my team. I'm going to win. Sure. I'm going to go in the championship. These are the guys that are going to help me get there. Once we get past this tier, we have guys that I would rather be my RB3, my RB4, guys I'm using to piecemeal into that RB2 position, maybe if I have multiple of them. But these guys I think are going to have enough production this year while still offering, here, this is where we get into the 1 or 2 year. The tier before, I feel confident about all those guys for 2 years. This is the point where I know this year, maybe next year. I'm not ruling next year out, maybe next year, but I'm not super confident about it. And then after this tier, we get into the guys I know about this year, but I'm not super sure about next year. So that's kind of where my mind is with this little baby tier here, Bob. And at the top of this tier, we have Josh Jacobs. who we've talked about at length on this channel. It's either a 1 or a 2-year deal, not a 4-year deal. But we're looking at a guy that has continued to get volume and produce his entire career so far. The Packers offense last year was super efficient. If Josh Jacobs can maintain that RB1 role with the Packers this year, maybe next year, he's going to be really productive. I don't think you want Josh Jacobs 3 years from now. I don't think that's going to be someone you're going to want to be holding on to. Maybe it's this year and then you move on this coming off season. But I think we've got a guy that can certainly finish. Certainly as a top 24 running back, I think Josh Jacobs, if he's healthy and he is that RB1, he has certainly RB1 upside in that offense. And because of that, he's here in this tier. He's someone that I feel confident about as my RB2. But long term, I do have some question marks after this year. And Bob, just go right into my next guy because there's only 2 players in this tier. Derrick Henry. He's in a great landing spot from free agency, going with the Ravens, a run-heavy team over the past 5 years. Someone that I think is going to complement Lamar Jackson really, really well. They're excited about what Derrick Henry is going to do. They're excited to give him a lot of carries. I don't know if we're going to see 300 carries, but it is within the realm of possibilities with how this team likes to run the ball. Along the goal line, I could see Derrick Henry getting a lot of touches for this team as they try to continue to save Lamar's legs, save his body, and not let him get hit a bunch down there. I think Derrick Henry's set up to have a really, really good year. He is on a 2-year deal, so this could be a second really good year next year as well. But also Derrick Henry is 29 years old. He is just on a 2-year deal. So while I feel really good about his production this year, I think he's certainly within the realm of possibilities of being a RB1 this year. I think he has top 5 upside this year because of the production he's going to show. Maybe not receiving work, but if those touchdowns come around, he could definitely be an RB1 or top 5 RB. But then going into next year, those question marks are going to come up. He's going to be another year older. Is the team going to look to replace him, maybe get his successor? Because they don't really have that next man up on their roster right now. Justice Hill is there. He's the backup, and he's been great throughout his career, but he's been there for about 6 years now. Keaton Mitchell coming off the injury. I don't think they're going to be relying on him for anything in the future. And they drafted Rasheen Ali, who is a fun little pick late, but is not their RB1 of the future. So while they're really excited to have Derrick Henry this year, it's going to start to look different after this year, I think, with the Ravens.
That Green Bay offense for running backs has been very good, especially the running back one. And, a lot of that is Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is very good in his own right, but I don't think Josh Jacobs steps in and that's too much of a downgrade. I think Josh Jacobs is a good enough player. I think he's a scheme fit, but I do think limited time offer, basically. I don't think he's a long-term deal. 1 to 2 years. We've seen the Packers kind of mess around with their running back contracts, particularly Aaron Jones, who it was kind of projected that he would have been gone like 3 or 4 years ago now, but they've just kept adding on and adding on and adding on. They finally moved off him this year. Love the pick, and I love the pick of Derrick Henry here too. Putting respect to the value that he gives you in the short term. Running backs, you can't look out too far to begin with. We love, at the top of the show, we love talking about Breece Hall and Bijan giving you 4 to 5 some years. But at the end of the day, you have to respect the players that are probably still going to put up running back 1 numbers this year. Derrick Henry sure has the bill to do that. And that wraps up this baby tier 7 and moves us into tier 8, which is very much a lack thereof, a baby tier. This is a big boy tier. What do you got at the top of tier 8? Kick it off, Nate.
Yep. This is where Bob, I started to really hate the ranking process for the running backs. These are the rankings that I chose. It's a mess, though. I'll be honest, at the running back position at this point. Like I said, at this point, we're looking at guys that we're putting into our roster. We're not setting and forgetting it. We're not being confident about these guys are RB2s. They're going to be inconsistent week to week. There's upside baked in. There's also a risk baked in with these guys. And at the top of this tier is Najee Harris. I've always been a big fan of since his days at Alabama. I think Arthur Smith coming into that offense is going to be a good thing for Najee Harris. But at the same time, he isn't a split backfield. And I'm going to jump ahead of myself a little bit. Jaylen Warren is also in this tier. You can go either way. I think they're going to have rather similar production at the end of the season. I think they can both be top 24 running backs if this offense works out. If not, maybe high-end RB3s. It's going to depend on Najee Harris's touchdown count because Jaylen Warren's going to take a lot of the receptions, I think, in this offense. So Jaylen Warren, maybe he has more upside because of those receptions and the receiving work he's going to get. But Najee Harris, if this team can get down along the goal line, I think you're going to see a lot of touchdowns from him. So there's going to be this workload share between these two players. I think at the end of the day, you're kind of splitting hairs on which direction you want to go. I think you're both going to probably end up in a similar area as low-end RB2s, to be quite honest. I don't think either one of these guys are going to have a large share of that backfield. They're going to split it. I looked at these stats I talked about in the podcast a couple weeks ago. Arthur Smith over the past couple of years has had a pretty solid 55-45 split between his running backs. Expect Najee Harris to get that 55%, Jaylen Warren to get that 45%, plus the receptions baked in on top, the touchdowns for Najee. You're going to have pretty similar projections for both these players. So they're going to sit in this tier together.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think Najee for me is very interesting because of the whole, hey, please decline my 5th-year option so I can go somewhere else, allegedly on his own volition, asking to have that done and coming out in what expects to be a weaker running back class than the following year in terms of free agency. However, you have that caveat of it's supposed to be a good running back class. So who knows if this is a good move for him, but hey, a team could get it sorted with their free agency pickup before they have to do it in the draft. They could draft somebody else with that pick. You get it. So that's definitely interesting. Yeah, I mean, Jaylen Warren has somewhat slowly and very noisily siphoned off work from Najee Harris. But at the end of the day, Najee Harris has continued to be a good running back for fantasy.
Yep.
And unless this offense takes a pretty hefty step back, low-end running back 2 for Najee feels light to me. Like, I still think he could be a mid running back 2. It's going to feel like he's a low-end running back 2 because last year was frustrating as all heck, but he still ended up, I think, being running back 15 on the year, large in part due to volume. But, we have to credit Arthur Smith for one thing he is good at, and that is drawing up running systems. And I think Najee with the right system could pop in this offense, but hey, Jaylen Warren gets to be a part of that system too and get favorable running schemes for him as well. So interesting grouping for sure. Definitely interesting seeing them together. That's probably one of the most interesting things with this tier for me. But we can move on to this next player, knocking out 2 birds with 1 stone in a conversation.
Yeah.
That's pretty fun. What do you got with your next pickup here?
All right, next up, we got Brian Robinson Jr. for the Commanders. This is probably a little off, maybe not consensus, but I'm actually pretty high on Brian Robinson, who had a really good season last year. They did bring in Austin Eckler, but honestly, I'm not too worried about Austin Eckler. I think he'll definitely take some of that backfield's touches to start the season, but I don't think we have Eckler of old anymore. I think Eckler is past his prime. He has hit that cliff, and he'll get some work this year, but I think we're going to see that decline continue. So with that, Brian Robinson will continue to probably be the RB1 for this team by the end of the season, certainly. They're going to limit Eckler's workload to help his efficiency, help him stay fresh. Brian Robinson's going to take those carries, especially on the ground between the tackles. Austin Eckler might be used a good bit along the goal line because he's always been really good at finding the end zone. But I think Brian Robinson in his own right has been good at that as well. So I don't think his workload is going to just disappear. Well, maybe he doesn't have quite the same upside. Last year, we saw some receiving ability out of Brian Robinson last year that really helped his fantasy output. But also something we saw from Brian Robinson was just consistency. He played week in and week out. I think he missed a couple games near the end of the season, but overall was very consistent, brought a nice floor to the table. And with a rookie quarterback, I think this team, as any rookie quarterback, is going to struggle. They're going to rely a bit on the run game. Brian Robinson Jr., like I said, was consistent. They're going to make sure to use him early in the season. So I think we have a player here that, like the other players here, I don't love as my RB2, but as RB3, RB4, I think you have a nice piece that you can put into your lineup when you need them. So Brian Robinson Jr., still a couple years left on his rookie deal. So I like his consistency. The upside might not be there, but his consistency is hard to come by at the running back position.
I can't say I'm super interested in Brian Robinson, but I can certainly see like the upside for him in this offense that is supposed to be new. We have Cliff Kingsbury coming in. We have Jane Daniels coming in, which in some aspects, rushing quarterbacks can help the running back succeed, opening up rushing lanes and things of that sort. But at the end of the day, I just, with this offense, I'm sure there's value to be had here. You are a little higher than him on consensus. I looked at Keep J Cut. He was running back 30. You have him in the 23 to 18 range, maybe a little higher than consensus, but hey, that's okay. Another thing, hey, if you like Brian Robinson, if you were thinking about maybe going and buying in, hey, Nate has given you his vote of approval, whatever that means to you, I don't know. But I can't say I'm excited about Brian Robinson, but a consistent running back too is not bad to have. Especially if, again, it's when you acquire running backs, when you have running backs on your roster, what are they going to be for your team? I choose to be a little bit more skeptical of what they could be for my lineup, and maybe, bump them down that little bit. Like maybe realistically I could get top 15 running back numbers. Maybe I'll say, well, top 20, and just be that little bit more picky with who I pick up. So I don't hate the spot personally. I don't think he's out of place really here. I think it's just kind of Austin Eckler coming to town. I think that has a lot of people rattled a little bit more than they probably should. In all honesty, I think Brian Robinson at one point last year was like up to running back 12 in Dynasty ranks, and that shows you how volatile that position is in Dynasty specifically, but year to year in general, it's people be wilding. But we got another player up here, another interesting player that's kind of come out of quote unquote nowhere to be relevant. And we've been saying this team's going to draft another running back at some point, and they're just like, no, we're not. We are 100% happy with the guy we have, and they did nothing to address his position this offseason, really, in my opinion. But what do you got here kicking off the next part of this tier?
Yeah, next tier, I got Isiah Pacheco. And I'll be quite honest, I have no shares of Pacheco. I have avoided him so far in his career because it's the Chiefs backfield. They just have different running backs. They have different roles. Jerick McKinnon was the receiver there. And then Pacheco came in and kind of took over the role as a runner, but has kind of taken over the backfield. Maybe he's not a workhorse, but he's certainly their RB1 and has been for the past season and a half or so. So there's value with Pacheco. For some reason, I can't trust him to put him any higher up on this tier. I think he's a good running back, but I don't think he brings anything that is next level. Like a Josh Jacobs or Derrick Henry, who are in a tier above this. But at the same time, he's got the volume. He's had the efficiency that's been good enough. And the Chiefs offense, you want a piece of that. So he is in this tier. He offers more upside than a guy like Brian Robinson Jr. He probably offers a better floor as well, to be quite honest. But at the same time, I think both these guys, without being too optimistic, you're looking at low RB2s, and then it can vary from there depending on like touchdowns. Pacheco ends up with a bunch of touchdowns. Pacheco could very well end up being like a low end RB1, but I don't know if that upside is really there for him. So he goes in this tier. I couldn't really drop him down. He's been too productive and too consistent really for the Chiefs for the past year and a half. But I don't think he offers enough upside to really be any higher than this.
I don't know if I would balk too much at the idea of bumping him up one tier to hang out with Josh Jacobs and Derrick Henry, just because I think he's at this point in the contract, he's in. He's got 2 years into his deal. He's an undrafted or not undrafted. I'm sorry, he was a late day 3 pick. So I mean, he's got 2 years left. It's all signs point to them just riding it out with Pacheco, and maybe they re-sign him. Who knows? And at which point you really have to consider he's fringe running back 1 and 2 numbers. I don't think you're low on him here. I don't think you're too low or anything like that, but like I said, wouldn't balk at having him a little higher because he has, exceeded pretty much all expectations to this point. I don't hate him here. I get it. We got some interesting picks ahead with what could be future potential.
Yeah.
One player we love and another player we like the landing spot of a good bit and like the player enough to keep him in rhythm with the landing spots. What do we got here wrapping up tier 8?
Yeah, wrapping up tier 8, we have 2 rookies. And I put these guys in the same tier rather than making a separate tier for them because I think tiers are important where if you're a competitive team, maybe you're not going after the 2 rookies, you're going after an Isiah Pacheco, you're going after a Najee Harris. But if you're a team that maybe isn't contending and you have those players, can you make this lateral move to these other players that are probably going to be better for you in the long term? You don't need points right now. And first up, we got Trey Benson. I think Trey Benson is in a good spot because his ability as a receiver, his ability to break off big plays. I have some questions about his vision. But I think in that kind of offense, those question marks are going to be minimized. And he's got some time to learn from James Conner as well. He's not going to be someone that's going to be thrown into that role right away. Gives him some more time to develop. I think we will see certainly some Trey Benson this year. But I don't expect them to give us top 24 numbers on the season this year. But we probably will see some weeks where we get some 15, 20-point weeks out of Trey Benson, especially if James Conner was to miss any time. So that kind of upside, plus the fact that, hey, day 2 running back, rookie year, you want these guys, you want to get them early because if they hit, their value is only going to improve. And then next up, probably a little high versus consensus, but Bob, you and I are on the same page here.
Yep.
I got Marshawn Lloyd in this tier, and I'm not second guessing it. I have him right there with Trey Benson. I love what Lloyd brings to the table as a runner, as a receiver. And the fact that he's gone to the Green Bay Packers, where Josh Jacobs, like we said, is the only 4-year deal, but it's a 1-year deal, possibly a 2-year deal, depending on how they want to throw that money around. And what I've heard from training camp so far, and I'm sure you've heard the same, Bob, is that they're already using him. They have a role in mind with Marshawn Lloyd. They're excited about him. Josh Jacobs has not been explosive over the past couple of years, and Marshawn Lloyd's been very explosive. So that might be a nice little 1-2 punch for the two of them. I'm really excited about Marshawn Lloyd. I think he's a great sleeper right now, a great buy, because as soon as this team moves on from Josh Jacobs, or Josh Jacobs starts to show some more decline, Marshawn Lloyd's going to be there, ready to pounce and ready to take over in a really, really efficient offense.
Yeah, I love these two here wrapping up this tier. Big fan of Marshawn Lloyd and everything you touched on with. I think he's the heir apparent to that running backfield. And this offense is heading in the right direction. Jordan Love has it in the right direction. We have a great group of wide receivers. And, 2 running backs right now. A.J. Dillon's there, but, I mean, good Lord, is he really? Long term, I'd much rather have Lloyd, obviously, and I really like adding him here in this year. And I like the concept you put together of like, hey, these running backs are similar values, but you have to have, again, what we touched on already, you have to have expectations for what players are. Marshawn Lloyd, Trey Benson are valued here, but we don't think, I'm not expecting a top 30 running back season from these guys by any stretch of the imagination. No. And that's well documented that rookies drafted 3rd round or later just don't usually do that. So something to think about. Like you said, like you touched on beautifully, having different expectations for tiers, playing off values of what could be better later versus what is better right now. But speaking of right now, we have another tier to get into, tier 9. I have a bone to pick with a running back in this tier, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Who do you have kicking off the tier at top tier 9?
Yep, Bob, I'm not super excited about this tier, but this is where these guys fall. That's what I'm saying for like every tier at this point. It's the running back position, a well-known running back hater. We got Javonte Williams here, who is on the last year of his rookie contract. I've always liked the talent of Javonte, but not a lot of positive things coming out of Denver, to be honest, regarding Sean Payton and his love for Javonte. I don't really see that. He's actually talked a lot more about Audric Estime and Julian McLaughlin than he has Javonte Williams. The thing holding Javonte Williams together is that it's the last year of his rookie contract, so they can just ride him out. They can give him a ton of volume. He has been a good pass catcher, and I expect this offense to see a lot of targets go to the running back position. Now, they could go to Julian McLaughlin, and if that happened, it would really hurt Javonte Williams. But if Javonte Williams gets them, I could see a top 24 season out of him. He has that kind of potential this year to be an RB2, but also at the same time, with the injuries he suffered the last year of his rookie contract, not a lot of good vibes coming out of Denver for him. He also has a very low floor, I think. This is a guy that could lose his job, I think, this season. So there's a very wide range of outcomes for Javonte. And, if he doesn't go well, then I don't know how well free agency is going to treat him. A lot of question marks with Javonte. He's got the talent. Don't feel super great about the situation, though. So he's here. I'll be honest, Joe Mixon should not probably be in this tier just from a fantasy production standpoint. Because he is on the Texans and they did sign him to a contract and he's the RB1 there by far. We expect to see some production out of him, but I will be quite transparent and just say that I've never been a big fan of Joe Mixon. I've always had him ranked lower in my rankings. Someone else probably put him a tier or 2 higher. I know Mike's pretty big on Joe Mixon this year. I'm not a big fan of Joe Mixon. I don't think his efficiency has ever been that great. He's here, though, because he's going to score fantasy points. He's the RB1 on the Texans, so I couldn't drop him any lower than this. And he's still young enough and he's shown enough production where I don't think this is just like a 1 year and done. There's a possibility for a second year for Joe Mixon to continue to put up decent numbers. But I think what we're looking at with him is not someone who's going to be the X factor of that offense. He's going to be a complementary piece of CJ Stroud and that passing game. So I think with Joe Mixon, unless there's all of a sudden a huge touchdown number for him, I think we're looking at an RB2 season out of Joe Mixon if he's healthy. You got 2 players there who are productive, but don't have a ton of long-term upside to me and have some question marks about their productivity this year. 2 more players, Bob, in this tier 9. I got Jahmyr White here. 3 weeks into the season, could jump up a tier or 2 because he is the RB1 for the Raiders right now, and his efficiency was really good at the end of last year. If those numbers continue, that volume continues, he's going to be jumping up ranks really quickly. But also, this is a guy we don't know a ton about. We haven't seen him a ton. How good is that Raiders offense even going to be? I love Aiden O'Connell as much as the next guy in Gardner Minshew, but I also wouldn't necessarily want those guys leading my NFL team into a season as the quarterback. So some questions about the efficiency of this offense overall. Even if Jahmyr White gets the volume, Is the efficiency going to continue? I really do like Jahmyr White. I think he's got a good potential for this year, but also I have question marks about the long-term viability of Jahmyr White. Is he truly the RB1 moving forward, or is he just the RB1 of this year? And this is the classic, hey, 1 year, this is the guy that was in the situation. He performed well, but they moved on to somebody else next year. Remember, Jahmyr White, not a day 2 running back. I don't trust day 3 running backs, Bob. You know that pretty well, but I will trust them for 1 season if they have the opportunity to round out this tier, and then I'll let you get your feedback in here about who you don't like. I got Tyjae Spears in here, and I have flip-flopped over the past year in Tyjae Spears. He was drafted to the Titans. I didn't like the landing spot. I was also really worried about the fact he has like no ACLs in his knees, but he performed well last year, caught a lot of passes. I believe it was 55 receptions on the season. And then the Titans let Derrick Henry walk in free agency, and then they signed Tony Pollard, who I have absolutely no worries about being a factor in that, a significant factor in that backfield. I'm not a Tony Pollard fan, have not been. His efficiency was really low last year coming off the injury. That was a Cowboys offense that did not pass the ball so much that I expected Tony Pollard to be more efficient with the touches that he got. Didn't really see it there. I think these guys kind of cannibalize each other, but I do have some faith in Tyjae Spears. Talking it out, there's a good chance I could drop him a tier, but I don't believe in Tony Pollard enough, where I think that Tyjae Spears has the opportunity this year to be the RB1 for the Titans. I think by the end of the season, there is a path for Tyjae Spears to be the RB1 for the Titans, and then us be looking at, hey, Tyjae Spears going into year 3 is the RB1 for the Titans. Tony Pollard is the veteran there that's just kind of helping out. There's the chance that they're just the obvious 1A and 1B. They both finish as RB3s, and then we do it all again next year or go somewhere else. So I will admit there's a little bit of projection here with Tyjae Spears. I have become a fan again, and I just kind of fit him into this tier just a little bit, Bob, because I'm excited about the upside that he shows, especially with the receiving work. If he can continue to get that, I think we could have a pretty good season out of him.
I didn't think I would be coming onto this podcast today and being the Tony Pollard guy. I didn't think I'd have to do this.
Fortunate you got to do that.
Sometimes, Nate, we have to do things we don't want to do, I guess. But with Tony Pollard, I have a tough time believing that they paid him all this money. It is looking at his contract. It's probably a 2-year deal, not a 3-year deal, but he signed on for 3 years, $21 million. Nothing crazy, but I find it hard to believe that they paid him all this money to have him come in and not be the guy from day one. You touch on pretty inefficient coming off the injury. I get that, but I would have most likely, if anything, Tyjae Spears, and with looking at where you have Tony Pollard, I'd have them flip-flopped, or at least some, I'd have Spears lower, Tony Pollard higher. And I as much as I don't like this Titans offense, because I've been on record, I don't want Will Levis. I don't want any of the aging wideouts on that team. This entire offense could be turned over, dismantled in 1 to 2 years very easily, looking at all the contracts of the players and the minimal investment in Will Levis, only an early 2nd-round pick. There's no real staple to this offense going forward outside of some of the offensive line pieces. They have young offensive line pieces. So there's some young offensive line pieces that could be there for a long time. I just find it tough to believe that or think that Tony Pollard is going to take a backseat to Tyjae Spears at any point. I know we like Tyjae Spears as a player a little bit, but I do agree. I tend to agree that they kind of cannibalize each other. I think that was one of the first things we talked about when the signing happened, was it almost feels like they're very similar players, which, both aren't premier ball carriers. Neither is a bell cow by any stretch of the imagination. Both better suited as change of pace backs, with a more primary running back one in front of him. Tyjae Spears was a great compliment at the end of the day to Derrick Henry and what he did. But, this Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears system almost feels a lot like what they've done with Kyren and Blake Corum and Rachaad White and Bucky Irving, almost to a point. And the investment in Tony Pollard, if it weren't for that, if he just happened to be on this team, they were drafted similar draft capital, something along those lines, whatever, I wouldn't disagree with your argument or your thought on Tyjae Spears over him, because I think it would be kind of a horse apiece at that point. Which horse do you bet on? I'm betting on the one that has the more money coming in at the end of the day. And we have seen very good numbers out of, albeit in a limited role with Zeke. Yeah, that's the bone I have to pick with this tier in terms of, getting real quick into Joe Mixon. I think he's a decent enough buy if you're looking for some production. I think he's kind of like you. I've never been super high on Joe Mixon. I feel like he's kind of just rode the coattails of the offense he's with, and he's been blessed being on a lot of good offenses with Cincinnati over the last couple of years, especially and just in general. I think he's just kind of a good enough player where he's like above average, but he's not like a game breaker like some of the players we've already talked about. Jahmyr White, 100% agree. A lot of miles on those tires as well. Not a lot of tread left on the tires. Nate, and has had 2 ACL injuries himself.
He sure has.
So something to consider as well with his long-term viability and the draft capital mixed in. I get that 100%. Javonte Williams, like you said, too, a running back coming into free agency, his contract year coming into free agency. I know we talked about with Najee, there's some opportunity in the free agency running back class, but Javonte, if he doesn't do anything this year to pad his resume, I have a tough time seeing a team wanting to pay the guy much.
No. Tony Pollard is giving me insane Miles Sanders vibes.
That's fair.
That's why I have my ranking as it is because I think Tony Pollard is this year's Miles Sanders.
I just be out on the backfield then because I think Tony Pollard is going to get the first crack.
Chuba got 1,000 yards last year. I think Tajay Spears is probably going to be more efficient than Chuba. Man, and I mean that Titans offense can't be worse than the Panthers. I don't
want any of them. I don't want any of them, Nate.
That's fair too, though.
I don't want any of them. Yeah, that's probably my biggest gripe with this year. And I think, like you kind of said with Najee and Jalen, Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, we're kind of splitting hairs a little bit, but a tough backfield to decipher. I tend to lead where the money is, especially if I'm investing similar draft capital to add either of these guys. I do think Tajay's a little cheaper, probably too, in most cases. So I get the projection. I don't hate it. That's just my gripe here. With that said, that closes out tier 9, gets into our final tier here, talking tier 10, Nate.
So
the torture is over. Running backs are tough to talk about. When you get outside of the top bits, and man, not nearly as fun as the wide receivers we were talking about when we got to wide receiver 30, but we're doing this here for y'all. If you want to chop it up with us that much more before we get into this tier 10, patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. Chop it up with us in the Discord for a free 7-day trial. Talk a little bit more about these rankings and where we have players valued in depth. See what we can do to better your fantasy team along with the help of our beautiful Dynasty community behind us over on Discord. Nate, kick off tier 10. What do we got here?
We got fantasy points here, Bob. We got points. We got points, okay? These guys are 1-year rentals, but they're going to score you points this year. And while I've talked about, we've passed the guys I feel comfortable as my RB2, I'd feel comfortable with these guys as my RB2 in my competitive teams, but certainly not after this year. These guys are not in my plan and my running back room really at all after this year. But I do love each of these guys as running backs that you can invest in to help your team win this year. So they round out the tier here before we get to after tier 10. There's a bunch of young players who haven't really done much, older players who earn their way out. But these 3 guys I'm still excited about. Leading it off is Devin Singletary for the Giants. It's been productive everywhere he's gone. He's back with a coach that he used to be with. There is not really any competition in that backfield except for Tyrone Tracy, who is a rookie running back who converted from wide receiver. I like the potential there, but I'm not worried about him really being a big competitor for Devin Singletary, who has been a very productive NFL running back for years now. I like what he's going to do in that offense. Probably not going to be the highest ceiling in the world because I don't think that offense has a great ceiling, but his volume and the fact that Devin Singletary continues to be efficient and get yards no matter where he goes, no matter what the situation is, I think he's going to be a productive running back this year. Probably can put up a top 24 season with the Giants, just based on the volume he's going to get. Next after that is James Conner for the Cardinals. I know he's got Trey Benson behind him, but he has been a consistent producer. And while he is older and older, his production and his health, honestly, has been pretty great. He continues to go out there and even on a terrible offense to start the season last year was putting up good fantasy numbers. Kyler's back fully healthy. They've added Marvin Harrison Jr., so there's a bit more stress on defenses from the past game. I think we're set up for another good season from James Conner, probably his last one, to be honest, especially with Trey Benson now coming up there to be his successor. And I use that word 3 times in this show. And then rounding it out, Bob, perhaps my favorite value at the running back position this entire offseason so far. Gus Edwards on the Chargers, reuniting with Greg Roman, reuniting with a Harbaugh, going into an offense where it's him, J.K. Dobbins, who cannot stay healthy as much as I love the guy and he's so talented. I don't think there's a lot to worry about with him, unfortunately. And Kamani Vidal, who I like, but was a 5th-round rookie out of Troy. Gus Edwards is the guy for this team. It's a team that's going to be set to run the ball a ton. This Gus Edwards was at one point leading the NFL in touchdowns last year. He is very, very productive. He's not a flashy guy, but he is going to fit so well in this offense. He's going to perform well. I think that there's a chance that Gus Edwards has an RB1 season, and I don't think that's crazy to say at all because of the touchdowns I'm expecting him to get. Those touchdowns really add up, Bob. You know that. At the end of the day, you score a touchdown a game, that's 6 points added on top of whatever else you're doing. I don't expect him to get a lot of receiving work, but I could see Gus having 12 to 15 touchdowns this year, and that's going to put him in a really good place for your fantasy team. So this tier here, Devin Singletary, James Conner, Gus Edwards, all three guys that you can go out there and buy right now for third-round picks, and you can slot into your offense, and you're going to love having those guys once you have to set your lineup and come the season.
I don't have a ton to add here. I'll just wrap it up with getting into some players that I think could have cracked the list, and especially when you're talking points and production. A couple players that I feel like with the rest of your tier groupings, I don't think there's huge value disparity. I don't think you're wildly off base with any values here at this point, or even factoring in projection wise and things like that. 3 running backs that I think could have made it into this list, the bottom of this list here. Aaron Jones going to the Vikings. I think that is a team that the running system has always been pretty good, but the last couple of years, the running backs that have been there have not been as good. Aaron Jones, good running back, still coming off a good year despite missing some of it due to injury. If he's healthy, he's somebody I think is going to absolutely put points in your lineups. Maybe a little higher value than some of the players we talked about at the end here, but still a player I like. Alvin Kamara, another player who I think is going to get run in this backfield, going to get a ton of reception work, even though I think Kendre Miller kind of comes along over the course of the offseason. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then also Raheem Mostert, a guy that we touched on with the Achane conversation, a guy who super cheap still to get for, and if he's on a competitive team, it's a little hard to pry away because obviously what's the incentive to give him away if that player is competitive? A lot easier to get if, they have to be getting something of more value than just a pick. Probably they probably want, help out their wide receiver room, help out their tight end room, whatever the case is, maybe help out a slight quarterback upgrade or something along those lines, or give them a quarterback backup and a wideout to help their wide receiver. Something along those lines would be more helpful than just a straight up pick for these guys. Unless they have no picks, they might be interested in something like that. But a concept I've been loving, exploring is the bridge running back concept and what I'm talking about is situations like James Conner and Trey Benson and Kendre Miller and Alvin Kamara, where maybe you have one or the other. And instead of just buying Alvin Kamara and saying, well, when Alvin Kamara is done, so is that running back position, investing in not only Alvin Kamara, but also Kendre Miller. Same thing with James Conner and Trey Benson. Invest in both. If you have one or the other, and you have James Conner, you don't want that competitive run to end. Go talk to that Trey Benson manager if you weren't able to get him in your draft, or if that draft is upcoming, see if you can get it and just pair it that way instead of having to make a trade where you might have to spend up a little bit to do it. And you get a handcuff on top of this move as well. So if you're trying to be competitive, this is definitely something I'm trying to implement. Guys that look like the successors to the veteran running backs that are ahead of them. Marshawn Lloyd and Josh Jacobs, another one we talked about. I'm all about this concept because you get to spread out the running back viability of a position. You have to project a little bit. You have to kind of go out on a limb because at the end of the day, Marshawn Lloyd, and this was shout out in the comments, don't know if you saw it, Marshawn Lloyd could, in some universe, I don't think it's going to happen, could be Tank Bigsby. With how he gets used and how his value trends the first year, it could happen. I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's vastly different situations overall because you have a clear running back one, but that running back one is not as invested into as much as arguably, I guess, as Travis Etienne was into with a first round pick still in the middle of his contract. But I like that bridge running back concept. Like I said, spreading out the running back viability of one running back investment as opposed to, like I said, buying into James Conner and being done. Something that could add value over the course of time. Like I said, don't hate anything we have at the end here with tier 10. But those are some running backs that I think would, a couple bonus conversations, a couple running backs that I think could have made the cut, especially with the production that I think you can get out of them this year versus, maybe some of the youth. Maybe you're trying to be a little more competitive, some additions you could add. And there's some running back strategy that I've been playing around with and, getting into with some roster reviews. If you want some roster reviews, check out the roster review option in the pinned comment or the YouTube description. But with all that said, and 30 running backs ranked and tiered up all beautifully and in some sorts masochistically, that's a word, maybe not. Like if you enjoyed the video, comment down below some running backs you maybe had higher or lower. Let us know who should have made this list. Was it some of that competitive group that I talked about? Or maybe some younger running backs like Kendra Miller, Blake Corum, who's valued at running back 22 on Keep Trade Cut, Zach Charbonnet, or Chase Brown, even some of these names that are rounding at the bottom of these ranks up in Nate's future tiers. And if you want to see more of Nate's tiers and some of my own, head on over to patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. Get in that gold tier. If you don't want the rankings, you just want to chop it up with us, head over to Discord. Get in that 7-day free trial. Check out some bonus podcasts while you're there. But with all that said, all the promo and rankings in the books, we are going to get the heck out of here. We will see you in the next one. But until then, I hope that y'all have a good one.